gentlemen, welcome to the third Riyadh International Humanitarian Forum, organized by KS Relief, the King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center. Thank you for prioritizing humanity by choosing to be here today. This room is full of humanitarian leaders, donors, practitioners, researchers, journalists from all over the world, a convening of some of the brightest minds in your fields. In an increasingly polarized world, thank you for choosing to come together, setting aside any differences and engaging in dialogue with a commitment to finding solutions to some of the world's most pressing humanitarian issues. Some humanitarian crises are the unfortunate byproduct of politics, manufactured by people. Others, a result of natural forces far greater than us. The recent earthquake devastating Turkey and Syria has brought into sharp focus some of the challenges we need to address together during this conference. How to build capacity, how to improve data collection mechanisms to get accurate numbers in disaster zones, how to streamline multilateral efforts to alleviate suffering, how to keep the world from falling into a pattern of crisis fatigue and turning away when the afflicted are most in need. In the news media, we're often guilty of perpetuating doom and gloom, focusing primarily on the problems and not the solutions. But sometimes we find the stories of hope, like the smiling baby bathed and fed after being found in the rubble, surviving the unimaginable. In the face of disaster, always look for the helpers. That's each and every one of you, and your work gives the world hope. It is my pleasure to introduce our first panel today. We're going to be focusing on the evolving humanitarian landscape for 2023 and beyond, the state of the humanitarian systems, challenges of 2023, and a look into the future. This panel will be moderated by Juliet Foster, and it's my pleasure to introduce her now.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Can I ask you please to take your seats because we are running slightly behind schedule. We have quite a lot of ground to cover, so please do take your seats so that we can actually get proceedings going. But Susanna has very kindly introduced me. She's also told you about the session, the panel that I will be chairing. But what I want to do now is to briefly take you back to December last year. Now, December last year is when the Global Humanitarian Overview, or the GHO, was launched in 3 cities. Those cities were Geneva, Riyadh, and Addis Ababa. Now, I was lucky because I was invited to the Kingdom for the launch, and not only did I meet some extraordinary people, many of whom are with us here today, but I also had the opportunity to witness the energy, drive, and commitment that led to the GHO initiative. Can I just be clear as well? Can you all hear me? Because there's been a slight adjustment to the microphone. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so I think that means that I need to speak a bit louder. Is that correct? Okay, well, I think you can hear me, so that's good. But let me go back to what happened in December. In 69 countries will require assistance, and that in itself is an increase of 65 million compared to the same time a year ago. Now, the cost of helping these people, many of whom will be displaced internally or externally through conflict, climate change, and a scarcity of resources, has been put at $51.5 billion. So, going back to the original question, what was there to be optimistic about? Well, the good news is that more people are being reached with aid and humanitarian assistance. The UN and its partner organisations set a goal of helping 216 million people through 35 country plans and 8 regional plans. And this equated to an 18% increase in the original number of people targeted for help at the beginning of 2022. Now, of all those targeted at country level, 157 million, we're talking 79%, actually benefited from at least one form of aid in the year. Now, I can give you plenty of other reasons why we should be optimistic, but let's save that for the panels which will happen today and tomorrow. But the real point is that change is happening. However, there is no room for complacency. The outlook for 2023, as we heard, is challenging, and innovative methodologies are necessary to deal with the growing number of crises. And that means bringing vulnerable communities on board as stakeholders, giving them a voice in strategies that will lead the way to a better future. It also means finding and engaging with new and current partners, regardless of whether they're from the private sector, governments, or foundations. It also means addressing the funding gap so that when disasters happen, everybody gives their fair share rather than those with the biggest pockets actually picking up most of the tab. Contributions should not be influenced by geopolitics or the view that perhaps some victims are more deserving of help than others. No matter where they're from, be it Turkey, Syria, Haiti, Pakistan, or Ukraine, they are everyone's responsibility. So, honoured guests, I ask you to hold those thoughts, which will be explored in due course. But before then, we will be hearing, hopefully in a few moments, from His Excellency Mr. Adel Jubeir, who is the Saudi Minister for Foreign Affairs. He's going to give us our keynote address of this session, and afterwards, we will then dive into the panel, The Evolving Humanitarian Landscape in 2023 and Beyond. Just a heads up, that panel is divided into two parts. Many of our panelists is here. Can I say it's wonderful to see you, some familiar faces there amongst the crowd, always very, very welcoming. So can I confirm that our keynote speaker is actually here? Is our keynote speaker here? He is here. It's wonderful. It's good to see you, sir. So can you please give a big warm welcome to His Excellency Adel Jubeir for that keynote speech. Excellency, the stage is now yours. If you would care to join us, please come and join us, and please welcome him for that keynote speech.
Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here with you today for this very important event. I just want to make my comments brief and say a few words about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's contributions and commitment to humanitarian assistance and to working with international institutions, and in particular United Nations institutions, to try to alleviate the suffering of many people around the world. The issue of charity is not new to us. It is part of our faith, and it is incumbent upon us to help those who are less fortunate. Saudi Arabia has a long history of exceeding United Nations goals for the percentage of developmental assistance it provides to less developed countries. We have in the past exceeded that number by several factors, the 0.07%. In 2021, Saudi Arabia was the #1 donor to less developed countries in the world. We provided over $7 billion of humanitarian assistance, most of it through international organizations such as those represented here, and mainly also through the King Salman Center, which has operations in over 88 countries. We try to ensure that the assistance that the Kingdom provides has transparency, and that there is oversight to make sure that we minimize any kind of waste or administrative expenses and focus on getting the maximum amount to those who need it. And so we welcome all of you to Saudi Arabia, and we look forward to broadening and deepening our relationship with you. I think the world is changing. We know that the priorities are changing in terms of the areas that need assistance and support. We look at the situation that we're facing with regards to climate change and the devastation that has wreaked on a number of countries, including the recent flooding that we saw in Pakistan, which resulted in damages to more than 30 million people. We saw the issue of food security that has caused tremendous hardships across the world, and we are trying to work with our partners and our friends and organizations such as yours to see how best we can not only provide for the assistance that is required, but how can we anticipate problems before they emerge so that we have the ability to manage them or hopefully avoid them from happening in the first place. So anyway, I said I would not speak very long, and here I am talking forever. I will try to stop here, and I hope that during the conversation I can address more specific issues that you would like me to address. I could have gone into what we're doing in the African continent. I can go through what we're doing in terms of issues involving climate, in terms of food security, Afghanistan, Pakistan. The list is very long, unfortunately. But what is fortunate is that there is a realization and a commitment among the international community and among donor countries that we have to work together in order to deal with these challenges that we face. And it is not only doing it for the sake of charity, because that's not what it is. It is doing it for our own sake. We inhabit a very small planet, and what happens in one part of the planet has an impact on the rest of the planet. And if we work together, as we have during the COVID pandemic, we can overcome the challenges that we face, and we can help the maximum number of individuals around our planet. So I will definitely stop here, and I'd be happy to continue our conversation. Thank you.
For those remarks. Okay, so we can now begin our panel. Part one, in fact, of the panel, the evolving humanitarian landscape in 2023 and beyond. So please, can you welcome the panelists? First of all, can you please show your appreciation to Dr. Abdullah Al-Rabia. Now, he is the advisor to the Saudi Royal Court and Supervisor General of the King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center. So please, could you welcome Dr. Abdullah Al-Rabia? And let's sustain the welcomes and extend it to His Excellency Martin Griffiths. Martin is the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator for the United Nations. So please, sir, come and join us on the stage. Please welcome him. His Excellency the Right Honourable Andrew Mitchell MP, Minister of State for Development and Africa of the United Kingdom. It's very good to see you, sir. Please join us. And Diana Janse, who's the State Secretary to the Minister for International Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade, Sweden. Diana, please come and join us. Diana, are you here? Excellent. Are you here? She's just on her way. Excellent, excellent. You were hidden away, we couldn't see you, but yeah, please, someone will guide you to your seat. It's good to see you. And let's keep it going by extending that welcome to His Excellency Mr. Yanis Lenarčič. He is the European Commissioner for Crisis Management. And finally, His Excellency Filippo Grandi, who is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Okay, so a lot of ground to cover. We had a sense of that, of course, from the presentation from His Excellency and also the general overview in my opening remarks. But let me start first with you, Dr. Al-Rabia. Somebody has to draw the short straw, and it's you today, I'm afraid. But look, so many things are happening in a humanitarian landscape, which is very complex. Is there any one particular thing that bothers you, that keeps you awake at night?
Well, there are many things that keeps me awake at night. But honestly, in the arena of...
Can I interrupt for one moment, because apparently we have a few problems. Is it a little bit further down? You can't hear? No. Yeah, can we have our technicians on the stage?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just think it's amongst our fellow panelists. They can't hear. Is that correct? Yeah. So if we can have an engineer come to the stage, please, just to... Is that better? That's fantastic. We can all hear each other. So I'm so sorry to interrupt you in your stride, Dr. Al-Rabia, but you were saying in answer to my question.
Well, I would say that many things will keep me awake at night. but I would talk about the humanitarian arena. And for me, a small child who lost his parents and his body is full of blood and crying for food is something that will keep all of us awake at night. A woman in tears who lost her children and spouse due to conflict, I think it will keep all of you awake at night. People shouting for help under the ruins of a building will keep us awake at night. But more so, I think what keep all of us as a group is the huge gap that we are facing between the needs and the funding, and also the inequity of priority that we should pay attention to it. I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's pick up on that. I'd like to know as well from the other panelists, so I'm going to throw this out. Are these concerns that you have as well? Dr. Arabiya was talking about children wanting food, people who've got nowhere to live, they do not have shelter. But at the end of the day, the funding gap, is that the main concern that most of you, the other panelists, also share as well? Or is there a concern, for example, about compassion fatigue? I'm throwing this out, but Martin Griffiths, if you'd like to pick up on that, please feel free.
Thank you. I was thinking exactly along the lines Dr. Al-Arabiya said, that the funding gap is hugely significant, and the direction of travel is going to almost guarantee that it's going to get worse. So we have a roughly likely funding this year for humanitarian programs probably just a little below 50%, despite the generosity of a lot of people on this panel and elsewhere. And that may become even more difficult next year. What that means is that we have to engage again, not just with member states and donors, but with civil society, and we need to have the passion and the activism that we see in the climate community imported into ours. Bring back to the humanitarian enterprise the kind of ruthless passion that we have seen in the past, and that we do need to see again, telling those who make decisions about money, this is money well spent. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Felipe and Diana, can you hear me? I know we have a few sound problems. Okay. Basically, what Martin and Dr. Arabiya have been talking about is their concern about the funding gap. And what I need to know from you is that one of your main concerns? It's a very complex humanitarian landscape, but is it the funding gap issue that really stands out for you?
Me.
So either of you, if you could respond, please.
Are you asking me to?
Yes, if you wish to respond, Andrew Mitchell, please do. We have a few sound problems. We will get through this.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and it's wonderful to be back in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The acoustics aren't working terribly well up here, but if I've understood correctly the question, I want just to take about 2 minutes to make some general comments about the international system, and particularly the points we've just heard on my right here from Martin Griffiths. I think that the international system and its humanitarian arm are more challenged than at any time in my political life. I've just come last night late from Turkey and seen the impact of the earthquake on the lives of people there, but also the international rescue effort, which seems to me to have been remarkably well coordinated on this occasion, with all the different elements within the humanitarian system pulling their weight. So that at least is signs for optimism. But more generally, we live in a time of greater nationalism, less international cooperation, but also at a time when all the major problems in the world do require more international cooperation, whether we are talking about climate change, humanitarian relief, the challenges of migration, the challenges of pandemics. All those things require much greater cooperation across the international system. And it also comes at a time when 30 years of progress from 1990 to 2020 have stalled. We've finished a period of enormous humanitarian progress, and over the last 3 years going very fast backwards. COVID and many other factors of international security are causing that, not least Russia's appalling activity in Ukraine. And also the position of women in the international community. It's impossible to understand these humanitarian crises unless we see them through the eyes of girls and women. And we face limited budgets, as Martin was saying. I think I'm right in saying that across the humanitarian system, some of these calls for urgent funding are only 57% met. And on the other side of the coin, we also have very constrained resources, so we have to satisfy our domestic taxpayers in terms of accountability, transparency, and the efficiency of the use of their resources. And so, in answer to this question, I would say there are three key things. The first is to focus on the people most at risk in a marketplace, in a humanitarian situation where the numbers are rising, to anticipate some of these awful crises that are coming. We know all too well, for example, in the Horn of Africa, where I was before Christmas, that anticipation over recent years, we've been able much more accurately to anticipate the crises before they come. And secondly, to focus on, and thirdly rather, to focus on more imaginative ways of boosting the finance so that Martin and his colleagues have the resources with which to make the system work better. So people most at risk, anticipation and resources seem to me to be the three most important aspects today. Thank you very much.
I've got my sound back. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. So Andrew Mitchell, thank you there for nailing down the concerns that you have. And I'd like to get the response as well from Diana and Felipe, because I do believe that we have conquered the audio demons.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for organizing this conference, and thank you also to KS Relief and OCHA for inviting me to this panel. As we heard already several of times, the humanitarian needs across the globe are constantly rising, and last we've seen this devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and before that we had the war we still have the war in Ukraine ongoing, which is not only causing a lot of suffering and destruction in Ukraine, but has also triggered a global implications. So it's triggered food insecurity and also contributed to this cost of living crisis that are affecting the poorest the worst. For us, a major priority is to, given this funding gap between the increasing needs and the limited resources, one important priority is to broaden the donor base. There are too few donors. In more or less 10%, the 10 top donors contribute with 90% of the humanitarian funding, and that is just simply not sustainable. So we need to include more partners into this, and more countries should follow the example of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that has in a few years become a very important international humanitarian partner. A second priority to bridge this gap is, of course, to increase efficiency. We need clearer priorities. We need a lot of flexible funding. We saw how important it was in Turkey and Syria. For Sweden, we are a core donor of core support, and we see the flexibility that provides and the importance that has for the humanitarian system to work as efficiently as possible. But we need more states and more actors to step in to provide this kind of core funding. Well, the third priority would obviously be also to see how we can decrease these ever-expanding needs. I think making sure that Ukraine wins the war will be a very important contribution in that respect. It will mean that the Ukrainian farmers can yet again plow their fields and become a major exporter of wheat and other products across the world. But it also will be an important act in defense of the international system and the respect for international borders, which
Right.
I think is immensely important, because if we don't have that, we will have more and more conflicts and more human suffering.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And Felipe, can I hear from you? Because I do want to expand the discussion in the time that we have available.
Yes, it's a little bit odd to be in a panel where you don't understand the question, or you don't hear the question.
The basic question was, what are the concerns that you have?
Yes, I heard the previous speakers, so I think I can build on that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rabia, for having us here. If the question is on resources, yes, of course. This is a challenge, although I think we have also made progress in some areas that I think need to be flagged, like linking up better with development partners and so forth. But it is a problem. I would add one point, and I'm glad that I have the Swedish State Secretary on my right, because they're the champions of that. What we also need is not only more resources, but more flexible resources, because the situation we as an organization faced last year is that we were well-funded in some parts of the world, say the Ukraine response, and terribly funded in many other parts of the world where the crises are forgotten or marginalized. So unless we have flexible funding, we cannot make those decisions and allocate resources to respond to where it is more difficult to mobilize. I want to add one more point, if I may. This is, of course, linked to very protracted crises. They are the ones for which it is more difficult to mobilize resources. And in my area, the area of refugees, of displacement, unfortunately, there are many such crises. And the problem is that many of them suffer from long period of time because there is no political solution. My best moments in the last few months were being in Côte d'Ivoire, where we closed, after 20 years, the refugee situation. We declared the cessation clause for refugees because a political solution was found. And I had a very good moment, I have to say, in spite of the challenges. Also, a couple of weeks ago, when I finally managed to fly to Mekelle, to Tigray, and displaced people told me, there is a peace agreement now. It's far from perfect, we don't know what's going to happen, but we have a space. If you give us money to rebuild our house and to start again agricultural activities, we will go back. So a big shout out for more resources to be put where political solutions are open, because that's the only way to move on from humanitarian responses to more sustainable solutions.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Felipe Grande. I want to expand the topic by looking at humanitarian reform. And this is where, Janis, you come into the conversation, because we've been talking about flexible funding, the problems, we've had allusions to the problems which are happening on the ground, but surely part of it is structural, because what we have is a humanitarian system which is designed to react to crises when they happen. So we agree that there needs to be a change, but if all or part of that system is reconfigured to be proactive, then what sort of transformations do we need to prioritize, given the problems that our panel has outlined, and also things which people themselves here have witnessed on the ground as the foot soldiers? We need a voice, so... Yeah, we're going to pass along. Oh, here it comes. Here comes a microphone. That's fantastic. In fact, if we can have some more microphones.
Thank
in case
you.
The other.
Well, I would like, first of all, to underline that the increasing humanitarian needs are not because of ineffective humanitarian aid. Yes, humanitarian aid most often is response to problems created by others. I will be very blunt. We have to understand that more than 80% of humanitarian needs in the world are a consequence of conflicts, armed conflicts. So it's the failure of politics, diplomacy, and those responsible for maintenance of international peace and security, and we know who they are. They are mentioned in the UN Charter. They sit in the Security Council, that are obviously not doing a very excellent job at the moment, because the conflicts proliferate, the old conflicts persist, we have new ones. One recent one was actually triggered by a permanent member of the UN Security Council in gross violation of the UN Charter and in violation of international peace and security, for which the Security Council itself is responsible. So it's for the humanitarians to pick up the pieces when this happens, because people need help, we need to save lives, we need to alleviate suffering. The second major cause of humanitarian crisis is a situation where development action is not possible because of bad governance, because of the military coup d'etat, because of things like that, because of negligence of whole swaths of countries' territory. We see that in parts of Sahel. We see that, for instance, in Afghanistan, where even though we found a way for development actors to address the needs of the people, the basic needs of the people, the most recent decision by the Taliban to ban women from large parts of the humanitarian work has made our work much more difficult. But yes, there are possibilities to be proactive, to anticipate, as we say, and we try to do that, especially with regard to natural disasters that can be foreseen, like droughts, like floods, like tropical storms and the like. And we are supporting efforts by our humanitarian partners who try to conduct anticipatory action, foresee what is going to happen, and help people in advance of that. Also, we have set up what we call European Humanitarian Response Capacity, which basically is large stockpiles of humanitarian goods that we have pre-positioned in several parts of the world, including here in the Gulf, by the way. And we have used that, for instance, most recently in response to the earthquake in Turkey and Syria.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes left, still quite a bit of ground to cover, so let's see how far we go. But Andrew Mitchell, come into the conversation now, because there is a tendency among humanitarian agencies to consider doing more development work for various reasons, including aid conditionality as one, for example. So given that, is it perhaps time for aid agencies themselves to morph into providing basic services or development activities?
Well, you'll have gathered from my first contribution that I don't think that there should be that sort of mission creep in what happens. I think it's very important throughout the system that people stick to their knitting and do what they're best at and account to their funders and taxpayers for the effectiveness of what they're doing in a very transparent way. But I do think there is a crossover, and the best example of that crossover I saw for myself before Christmas in the Horn of Africa in Somalia, where you see a crisis coming from a long distance away. The international community react, and they deal with the humanitarian crisis. And you know, it's the Americans. Let's face up to the fact the Americans did the lion's share of the work in terms of feeding people who were starving in the Horn of Africa and in Somalia. And as a result of that, the immediacy of a famine was pushed back. But when you look at the spending in that area, what you see is this, that if 20% of the humanitarian spend that was being made was used to build resilience, was used to build adaptation, to mitigate the next crisis, mitigation and resilience particularly, then of course the next time the same humanitarian crisis hit, there would be much greater resilience and much better value for the money spent previously on humanitarian relief in terms of building up a resilience, which meant less money had to be spent again. So my answer to your question is we need to focus on what the different parts of the humanitarian system can do. We need to show why they need additional resources, and we need to demonstrate the expertise and effect which they are putting into place on the ground, rather than involve the sort of mission creep that your question suggested.
Okay, Felipe Grandi, you want to respond to that? I could tell by your enthusiasm. Yes, Felipe Grandi, yeah. So yeah, sure, go for it. I could sense that you wanted to respond to that.
Yes. I'll just build on what Andrew just said. I think it's very important. From the refugee displacement perspective, I often say, and my lawyer colleagues get a bit nervous when I say that, but let me say it again. I always say that the best form of protection for people that are displaced, refugees, is inclusion. And is inclusion, for example, in national education services, in national health services, is access to the labor market for people that are refugees and displaced. And to promote those approaches, those policies, you need developmental funding. Humanitarian funding can bring people to safety and keep them there, but then inclusion requires another type of intervention. And this cannot wait anymore for years, as we've done in the past. Needs to happen right away. And even in situation of extreme emergency, this needs to be looked at. The policy of the Ukrainian government is not only to give space for humanitarian assistance to those affected by the war, but also to ensure that recovery for them starts even as the conflict goes on. To build their resilience, as Andrew said about the Horn of Africa. So I think that this joined up approach, which, as I said many times, we should not speak anymore theoretically about because it's already happening, needs to be really looked at, built, and reinforced because it is essential for the sustainability of what we do in both humanitarian and development.
There are quite a few themes there, in fact, inclusion and also the joined-up approach that you referenced, which takes me back to you, Dr. Al-Rabia, but I want to look at those themes within the context of localization, because there have been pretty numerous calls, both within and outside the aid community, to bring more actors into the sector. We're having this debate now, and you could argue that this is a phenomenal example of multilateralism. In other words, the decision-making process is no longer in the hands of a handful of donors. So from Saudi Arabia's point of view, what is it doing to enhance the system, also transform foreign aid, and empower those local actors? In other words, putting them at the center of things, the inclusion that Felipe was just talking about.
Well, thank you, Juliet. I think what you have mentioned about bringing fewer actors and expanding the actors to be more global is something that we have to look at it with actually support. The humanitarian community is now becoming international, many regions, many continents, and we used to forget the local actors and the host community and local NGOs. I think with the expansion of the actors from few countries who are controlling the scene in humanitarian work has added value to how we look at things. And let me give you an example which you alluded to, Juliet, which is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has invested in KS Relief to bring this model to an international benchmarks. And in a few years, Saudi Arabia, with its international and regional partners and local partners, has managed to bring an added value to the humanitarian community. First of all, this forum is one example. Now Saudi Arabia is chairing also the OCHA donor group, which is also an added value. And also we have invested in the host communities and local NGOs by building their capacities. Nobody knows the needs better than the target countries or target communities. And unless you invest in those communities and try to build the capacities, invest in women, invest in youth, and try to maximize the impact of the funding. Now we have a huge gap between the funding and the need, and unless we maximize the impact of that work and build the capacity of regional and local players, I think we will continue to have inequity of how do we understand or deliver aid.
Again, it leads me to you, Diana, talking about creating resilience, enhancing what we have, empowering local actors. And when you discuss that, you cannot exclude women. You touched on it earlier. But my question to you, within the framework of accountability to affected populations, we know that gender equality is a crucial priority. So how should humanitarian actors better recognise and indeed respond to the needs of women and girls in this very difficult landscape? In other words, what is the shift that the aid agencies need to consider if they're going to prioritise the needs of women? We're talking about an intellectual and approach shift, effectively.
Thank you. Well, women and girls' participation is central to humanitarian response. We heard earlier from Commissioner Grande that the best protection is inclusion, and women's participation makes the humanitarian response more effective. That's well established. It leads to concrete results as more equitable food distribution, better sanitation facilities, and quicker resumption of education and livelihood activities. It is also known as a fact that women and girls are being disproportionately affected by humanitarian emergencies as victims of sexual and gender-based violence as a mean of conflict, for example, and Ukraine is a vivid and horrifying example, but it's far from the only way or the only example. To be frank, I think for the time being, it's not so much of better recognizing or better recognize. I think now the discussion is very much about holding the ground, given the developments in Afghanistan, for instance, where we see a tendency to want to exclude women and girls and women completely from being part of delivering the humanitarian response. And I think even if a lot of focus has been on the edict by the Taliban that was issued around Christmas, if we go back to the earlier one, the ban on education, that of course will have long-term consequences for delivering any kind of services. If there are no women nurses or midwives or doctors or teachers, Afghan women educators or health care workers, there will be no education and no health care for women or girls. So, I mean, our priority now must be to push back and never accept a response without women. We need response by women, for women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in fact, listening to all this very patiently has been His Excellency Al-Jubair, because obviously these themes, many of them are familiar to you. And from my perspective as the outsider looking in, Saudi has really taken a very important step, and a pivotal role, in fact, in promoting some of the ideals that we have been discussing so far, particularly the role of women and empowering them in local communities, because they are key drivers, particularly when communities have suffered disasters. So what's your take on this from what you've heard so far?
Sorry, I heard a lot of things, whether it involves humanitarian assistance in general, whether it involves donor fatigue, whether it involves mission creep, so we can address those. But on the issue of women, Saudi Arabia's view is that you cannot develop and progress as a society if half your population is chained to the kitchen sink. It doesn't work. Women empowerment is very important. It leads to greater economic prosperity, and it leads to more social stability. And we are promoting this, and we have been for many years. The majority of our students in universities are women, because we believe education is a pathway towards success. We're promoting recruitment of women in different sectors, in different government positions, and we're providing incentives in order to achieve those objectives. We, in different parts of the world, we have taken the position, made it and encouraged people to be inclusive when it comes to the issue of women. We take exception with the steps that the Taliban, for example, took to ban women from attending universities. We believe that was a wrong decision as well as an unjust decision. There is nothing incompatible with between women's education and the Islamic faith, as they argue. Quite the contrary. The first word that was revealed in the Quran was read. Read in the name of your God. So it is important that everybody has access to that. So that's on this issue. But I wanted to say a couple of things about what the distinguished panelists mentioned in the beginning. I think there is donor fatigue. There is fatigue with mission creep. I think it's very important to focus humanitarian efforts on helping people, period. Going into expanding into other areas like governance or trying to change the nature of a society or having conditionalities that go beyond transparency and beyond efficient allocation of resources really stretches things too thin and causes confusion. The objective is to fix a problem, try to alleviate suffering, work together in a cooperative spirit, pool resources, and then go in and help those most in need, not lecture them, not try to engage in social engineering or political engineering. That's the purview of other areas. Focus on helping those that need help the most.
Yes, and that's a key point as well. Focus on helping and don't lecture effectively. Martin Griffiths, this is part of the problem, isn't it? Because one of the complaints that we sometimes hear is that, yes, the system is doing its best. It isn't perfect, but then what system is? But there is the accusation that those delivering the aid are sometimes guilty of not asking recipients what they want or indeed need, which probably seems a bit strange, really, doesn't it?
Well, I think this is perhaps the central priority and challenge that we have for defining what a priority is. It was very interesting, to me at least, that the other day when the United Nations teams, first for many years, visited local partners in northwest Syria, the message consistently from those local partners, from the frontline Syrian organizations, was please make sure that the aid you bring here is aid that we prioritize and need and understand. And this is hardly surprising. In all walks of life, it is the consumer who decides what is important and what is a priority. Now, as Dr. Al-Arabiya started this discussion, where we have insufficient funds for growing needs, that conversation becomes important in terms of prioritization. But it's more important than that even. This is about respect. This is about changing the power dynamic in the relationship that we have, that the deliverers have at the front line between the humanitarian agencies and workers and all of us on this panel and those people we serve. And we say we serve rather blithely, but it is actually the fundamental issue for our relationship. Now, nobody should be under any illusions as to how difficult this is going to be to make this work and to make this real. But it's long overdue. It's an aspiration that all humanitarian agencies have. It's also something which many, many donors, again here present on this panel, also have. And we should be clear, if we genuinely start listening and adopting the aspirations and priorities of the local people, we will need to adapt the way we deliver assistance. It's not just listening, but it's being able to take a more a la carte approach to then delivering. And that's not simple, that's not easy, especially when the need for speed is so urgent, as indeed now we see in northwest Syria. But for me, and I know from many, many others, this is the current overwhelming generational challenge for humanitarian operations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 5 minutes left, panel, so if I could ask you to be brief in your responses to my questions. So Andrew Mitchell, following on from what we just heard, I want to look at this within the context of climate change, okay, because look, it is a huge issue, it's impacting what humanitarians are doing on the ground. My question to you is whether the system as it currently stands is properly geared up to respond to threat multipliers. They are numerous, especially when you've got countries which are in conflict and climate change is compounding the conflict and the other hybrids coming off that. Very briefly, please.
Well, thank you. I think that is an extremely interesting point. And I was in Niger last week, where every day climate change is eroding the equivalent in terms of agricultural land of 500 football pitches. And you see very starkly there all these things we've been talking about coming together. You see enormous insecurity in terms of food, insecurity economically, a region of the world that is very insecure politically. Indeed, Niger is probably the last man standing in the Sahel. And also, all of this compounded by incredible difficulties for girls and women in Niger, where 72% of all girls are married when they are 18 years old, and most of them are pregnant. So all these things come together. And in terms of the point you make about climate change, I would say that the Bridgetown agenda, in other words, trying to put flesh on the bones of the COP promise this year to turn billions into trillions, is absolutely pivotal. I think that the Bridgetown agenda has the capacity to achieve that over a period of time. But if you had a magic wand and you could produce today those trillions, you would not, I think, have enough oven-ready projects to proceed to absorb anything like that. I think the pipeline of climate change projects is not as strong as it should be. And what you see finally in Niger and Somalia is that the poorest countries have an inability to access this international climate finance and very strongly need to have access to it. They need to have the experience and support to gain access bureaucratically and in every way, and in terms of capacity, to get access to these funds. And I think the World Bank, under new leadership, may well do a great deal in that space. We in Britain are doing everything we can to help provide the necessary expertise to poorer countries which lack that access. But I think in terms of making of your question and making the system work, we need to look very hard at the supply of projects as well as the demand for money and how poorer countries get access to that money through building up their capacity and expertise.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let me take it back to the subject of money very, very briefly, Yanis Lenacic. ODI, the famous global affairs think tank, it says humanitarian assistance is the tip of a huge iceberg compared to climate adaptation, Islamic social finance, private funding, ODA remittances, all that sort of stuff. But listen, given that, very briefly, how can the aid community itself access the iceberg and not just the tip?
That's several dozen $billion question.
Which you can answer in 30 seconds.
I have some ideas, yes. First of all, this tip of the iceberg, as you call it, is far too narrow. I think Diana and others already spoke about it. There are too few donors out there. The 10 biggest humanitarian donors, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is one of them, provide more than 80% of total global humanitarian aid. That's unfair. So I think that we should understand that humanitarian aid is a global responsibility, should be shared globally and equitably in accordance with the capacity of UN member states to contribute to it. The second potential source is climate funding that you mentioned. Yes, there will be a lot of climate funding available in the years to come. There already has been from the European Union and its member states alone, about $25 billion per year is already made available. But I'm not saying that we should take these funds from the climate agenda and put it into humanitarian agenda. No. What I'm saying is that when we allocate the climate funding, we should not only provide funding for green infrastructure, for renewable energy use and so on. These are important things, but we should not forget about people. People need to build their resilience, and for that they need support, and we should provide this support also with the climate funding. Like, for instance, for the small farmers in the Sahel, to increase their resilience against the droughts that keep repeating themselves. And finally, the biggest chunk of that under the surface iceberg is private funding. And when I talk to the private funds, institutions and individuals, what I see is that the one reason why they don't invest in humanitarian settings is risk. Capital is a shy bird, as they say, and it's reluctant to go into crisis situations. So we want to show them that things can work. That's why we have launched a couple of pilot projects supporting small and medium enterprises in serving the refugees, for instance, in Uganda or Jordan, or employing refugees, or investing into the water systems. If we can show the private sector that it can work, that investing in such settings can work, I think we will be on a good way to tap more of that pool of funding.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now we have 2 minutes left because we are going to change over the panel. So the final question to all of you, and if I can start it from the end with you, Felipe, and then we can move it along the rest of the panel. If we meet here again in Riyadh in 2 years' time, what sort of changes are likely to be already implemented? What will you guys be telling me? Felipe, then let's move it along. If you could be brief, please.
I would say one is the centrality of climate action. Yanis just mentioned that, and I think that will grow as a key issue. And second, if I may, we are here, and we must be grateful to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and to the King Salman Center for bringing together here lots of aid actors from this region, from the GCC region. So I hope that every next Riyadh Humanitarian Forum, awareness grows in this region of the importance of these themes that we have mentioned today. Nexus with development, accountability to affected population, flexibility of funding, and the importance of resourcing also forgotten crises.
Okay, thank you. Diana.
Well, I hope we have broken this vicious circle of ever expanding needs. But I also hope that we have a better response through a broader donor base. If Sweden, a country of 10 million people with no oil, can be a top donor, I'm sure more countries can join in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew Mitchell.
Three things. First of all, more financial resources, the success of the Bridgetown agenda. Secondly, greater clarity of responsibility. And thirdly, an emphasis on localism and partnership and clarity of anticipation of events.
Thank you. Martin Griffiths.
Thank you very much. Two things. First of all, that I'd hope this hall, and thank you very much, Dr. Al-Arabiya, for convening us. I hope this hall of over 1,000 people in 2 years' time would include a third of the climate community, a third of the development community, a third of the humanitarian community, and another third, because my mathematics is so good, of the political, the solutions people. And that leads me on to my second point. I hope we see peace in Yemen. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Arabiya.
Well, in 2 years, I will probably echo solving all conflict. So we have that, we will be able to do that and expand donor community, government, private, and also charity, and also enhance digitalization and artificial intelligence in data collection and improve prioritization based on evidence.
Thank you. Janusz Inacic.
Thank you. I wish for one thing, that the funding gap, humanitarian funding gap, would shrink and disappear. And this can happen in two ways primarily. First, that we increase the funding available, including by attracting other donors. And second, by reducing the humanitarian needs, chiefly by preventing the conflicts and the stopping of the existing ones.
Thank you very much. And the final word to you, Excellency.
I hope we will see more focus and we see more cooperation, because the challenges are huge, the resources are limited.
But at least we've got some tools and some ideas to actually meet that challenge. Can you please show your appreciation to the panel for an excellent contribution and also for conquering the sound demons? I said we would get there in the end, and we almost certainly did. Thank you so much. If I could ask you to leave the stage so that we can begin the second half of our panel, please. But thank you so much for your contribution. Please do show your appreciation. They have been absolutely marvellous. Thank you.